Hi, I'm Sarah Rubenstein from United Way of Greater LA. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's discussion, What Will It Take to End Homelessness in LA? We are proud to be partnering with Zócalo Public Square to present this conversation. Everyone has a role to play in ending homelessness and ensuring that every neighborhood in LA has safe, affordable, and supportive housing. Through our Home for Good and Everyone In initiatives, United Way works to unify the community around the vision of ending homelessness in LA County. We work with diverse, multi-sector coalitions to test and scale the most transformative and equitable solutions. And we are committed to ensuring that community members impacted by housing insecurity and homelessness are authentically engaged in the development of those solutions. To learn more about our work, please visit us at homeforgoodla.org. Thank you again for joining us. You're in for a wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Miguel Santana, chair of the Committee for Greater Los Angeles. We are a group of civic leaders working to create a more equitable and inclusive Los Angeles and prioritize our county's most marginalized communities. We are so delighted to be partnering with the United Way and Zócalo Public Square to present tonight's event. And thank you, each of you, for joining us. I am pleased to introduce our moderator for the conversation, Anna Scott. Anna is a journalist and a reporter for KCRW who focuses on housing and homelessness in Los Angeles. She regularly reports on homelessness for NPR's national programs and for other publications. Anna, thank you so much for guiding this essential discussion tonight. Over to you.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you to Sarah. Hi, everybody who's joining us virtually, and welcome to tonight's event, What Will It Take to End Homelessness in LA? Thank you to Zócalo Public Square, United Way, and the Committee for Greater LA for presenting this conversation. Tonight's panelists have a lot of experience working to end homelessness and a variety of perspectives on the issue. I'm really excited to introduce them. Sarah Dusso is a member of the commission that oversees the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, which is the main agency that runs homelessness programs for the city and the county. Since 2015, she's held various roles on that commission, including chair, and she previously served as chief of staff to LA City Council member David Ryu. Carter Hughley is the Director of Homelessness Initiatives at the United Way of Greater Los Angeles, which is a large nonprofit that works on solving homelessness and poverty. Before that, he was a senior advisor at the DC Department of Human Services. Janie Roundtree is the founding executive director of the California Policy Lab at UCLA, which brings together experts from the University of California with policymakers to solve social issues, including homelessness. Jamar Wilson is the vice president and Southern California market leader at Enterprise Community Partners, a national nonprofit that works on housing affordability in a variety of ways, from policy advocacy to operating affordable housing projects. And Sean Pleasance graduated from Yale with a degree in economics and is a former small business entrepreneur with multiple Wall Street banking jobs. He was unhoused in Los Angeles for 10 years and is now an advocate for those without homes. Thank you all for being here tonight. And Sean, I want to begin with you. For this conversation, I want to start at the ground level, talking about how LA could bring more people in from the streets with the resources that it has now. And then gradually, as the conversation goes on, the plan is to zoom out and talk about bigger and bigger picture solutions to homelessness. So I know this is a big ask, but Sean, I was hoping you could give the mini version just in 2 or 3 minutes of your journey. And I know it's a lot, from how you went from being housed to unhoused and then now housed again. And then from that, I have a follow-up question, but I'll just start with that. Can you just tell us a little about your experience?
Okay, I will do my best here. I've thought long and hard about how to frame this narrative. It's my journey through homelessness. It's a complex narrative, but so is life. And before I start with the story, why don't I start with the good? At this point, I've been housed for 1 year. I've got 584 days of sobriety, including cigarettes and coffee. I'm working as an advocate to try to help others conquer the issues that I had trouble conquering myself. My story began about 2008. And I'd been having, I guess, a charmed life, so to speak. You know, I graduated from Yale. I had worked on Wall Street. I had my own business. But at that time, I found out that my mom had colon cancer and didn't have long to live. Also, at that same time, my business failed, and I found myself living out of my car, in denial that I was homeless. You know, spending time at different friends' houses, couch surfing, spending nights parked outside of familiar places. And this went on. Time passed. A lot of time passed. Next thing you know, we lost the car, and I finally had to surrender and realize that I was indeed homeless. And it's something I never imagined that could possibly happen to me. And there I was, suddenly in the situation where I'm actually live on the street, having to deal with life's problems every day, not once a month. Most people have to figure out, what rent once a month, groceries once a month, what they're going to be doing and so forth. Every single day, I had to make sure where I was going to be living, find food, find water. I had to find resources such as places to use the restroom. I had to secure safety to make sure I had a safe place. And this is every single day would change. It's a very exhausting existence to have, one that keeps you from even being able to look forward or have any hope. I had made 7 or 8, actually I made 8 attempts to get off the street. It was just to give you some idea of some of the things that went wrong. On the 7th attempt, my caseworker was arrested for Section 8 fraud. And each time you have these types of failures, and in my life, each one of these junctures, my hope was dashed. My dreams were crushed. The promise of me finding a way out, working with a particular caseworker or an agency, and suddenly to be dropped into nothingness. It's very disappointing, and it's very disruptive. So once again, I gave up again. It was through the grace of God. In my case, I think that I was happened upon by some angels. CNN broke the story, and suddenly my tragedy became national news. I wasn't overjoyed, and as most people would have thought. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. I felt that I had exposed all of my friends and family, colleagues, classmates to the scourge that was me. I was the failure, and suddenly it had been put out there. Fortunately, others cared enough about me to do something. And instead of me being told what to do, someone came to me and asked me what I needed. And that changed everything.
Yeah, I'm sorry for jumping in, but this gets to the question, that I wanted to ask you, because I had read about your story a bit before this event, and I was really struck by the fact that it was a regular person, not a professional, but somebody that had known you from school, who saw this CNN report, who ultimately came out and built up trust and had a lot to do with helping you get off the street. And so I was wondering if, what would have been more helpful to you from the professionals that you did interact with up to that point, the, nonprofit or government entities. What could they have done better?
Great question. What Kim Hirschman did for me was, first of all, she asked me what I needed. Second of all, she developed trust. Your trust has been destroyed when you're on the street as a human being. There's just, you have no confidence with anything. Unlike a professional that would come out from one of the agencies who maybe sees you for one of 3 purposes, either for outreach, either for a CES, or they come out to offer housing in a shelter. She came out just to get to know who I was, just to get to know what I needed. And we formed this trust, and she would come out 2-3 times a week. And once she formed that trust, I was willing to accept the help she had to offer.
Only in the interest of time. Oh, I just wanted to pause you there, because I do want to bring in, just on that note, Sarah, what Sean is talking about is something I've seen in my work as well. Oftentimes street outreach that is inconsistent or doesn't come with concrete offers, not because the people coming out are not skilled or empathetic or anything like that. Oftentimes they just seem to have many people that they're working with, and it's a matter of the resources at their disposal. So, as one of the people who oversees LASA, which in turn oversees a lot of the street outreach that goes on in the city and the county, as you listen to Sean, and are there things that LASA could do better, is doing better in terms of making that street outreach more effective?
Absolutely. And both the city and the county are interested in how we make outreach more effective and using, and just to be clear, LASA does provide some direct outreach, but then there's also intensive case management that's handled through Department of Mental Health or through DHS, Department of Health Services. And then in addition, there are many service providers who are also providing outreach. And, the work over the last few years has been trying to create that coordinated system. But time and time again, what I'm trying to do, whether it's through my work on the Greater LA Committee or my work on the Commission, is to bring the experiences of lived expertise to the forefront, because it really is real easy to design a program that on paper looks amazing. But if we don't have that real life experience at the forefront in the design process, it can easily not be as effective as it could be. I try to help my brother, who is suffering from mental health issues and homelessness, and is currently unhoused at this moment. And it is clear to me that those personal experiences, and when you have that firsthand experience, you're able to really understand what it means to ask someone what they need, as Sean was just describing, which is really a more complicated ask than it sounds. I mean, to really meet someone where they're at, and to really help them reestablish hope and reestablish trust is a big deal. So yes, we are working on reforms, but we have to do more. And that really centers on making sure lived expertise is at the forefront of both design and execution.
I want to open it up to everyone to just jump in. What holes do you guys see in particular with, you mentioned your brother is dealing with mental health issues, and when it comes to mental health services or addiction treatment services, which not everybody needs, but some people certainly do, I'm curious, what holes are there in our current system for people who need that help in particular, and are there ways to fill those holes?
And I could chime in here first, and thank you both for sharing your wisdom and your personal experiences. I know that's not easy to do. Really appreciate it. As the introduction to my role may have indicated, we do research at the California Policy Lab. So just wanted to offer one basic fact, and then I think answer your question around gaps. We took a look at everyone enrolled in street outreach services for a year and linked data to clinical mental health diagnoses and substance use disorder diagnoses. And 30% of street outreach participants have one or the other, either a serious mental illness or a substance use disorder, and about 10% have both. And I think the point is, you could argue over what's the size, but the needs of people are very differentiated, right? There are a lot of different kinds of people who are experiencing homelessness. And when you run big programs, it's easier to try to think of people in one category. Everyone needs housing, or everyone needs, a type of outreach. When in fact, if you're really meeting people where they are, you're going to hear about a lot of different kinds of needs. And for that outreach to be credible, you've got to follow through. When you're listening and you're hearing what the person needs, you've got to be able to respond with something to offer them. And I think that's, to me, the main challenge for street outreach workers. They want to be credible and they want to follow through, and we don't have the full spectrum of resources that are needed, I think, for people who are on the street. And to be more specific, I think we're all aware that there's a housing gap. We need permanent housing for people. That's the ultimate goal. There's also a shortage, I think, of high quality interim housing, particularly interim housing that is harm reduction or specific for people who are suffering from substance use disorder. And there are gaps in clinical intervention. So there's a resource called Board and Care for people who are suffering from serious mental illness who are not yet ready to be in a unit on their own. And those facilities are shrinking by the day. They're closing due to structural issues around how you finance those. So I'll stop there, but I just wanted to make the point that this is about resources ultimately. And once you establish that trust, you've got to be able to follow through with a pretty wide range that meets people where they are.
Might I chime in here? I think it's about how we use those resources. For example, you know, I was approached while I was on the street by many different agencies that come out, and I see a caseworker or outreach worker, and then you don't see them again. And the claim is always that, you know, because people are moving around on the street, it's hard to stay in touch with them. Well, I stayed in the same spot for 6 years. And I still had the problem of them not always coming back. So follow through is a really important issue. I think we need to raise the bar. I think we need to look at, really re-examine the way we do things. Right now, people have a certain caseload of clients, which I feel is usually too large, but they shouldn't be able to take on another person until they have solved the problems of the people that they have under their care. So if it's housing that they need, then you must find them housing. That's the ultimate goal. That is what you're trying to do. It's not just passing them on to another worker with another agency. There's a myriad of different fragmented systems that are very siloed, and one arm is doing exactly what's contrary to another arm. Each congressional district has different policies. But today, Joe Buscano, trying to reinstitute the no tents up between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. policy. Well, I have severe visual problems. So when it's dark, it really was dangerous for me to be trying to put my tent up in the dark every single day because of the times that are required by law. And this is motivated by NIMBYism, but it creates real problems for people on the street. There are a lot of us who have disabilities who are homeless. Where's the ACLU on all of these issues? Because is it really fair to require someone with disabilities to try to do these things in the dark and all through winter? That was a real problem for me. It's unsafe and it's difficult and it's cold. During some of these times, you hear that every day 5 people die, while homeless. Well, I had 4 times while I was homeless that I nearly died. Two from pneumonia, once from food poisoning, and another time when I got stabbed in the back of the neck with a screwdriver. It's a very dangerous place. Our goal should be to get people off the street as quickly as possible. And someone needs to create clear pathways. If you ask someone, how do you get someone off the street, or this question we're talking about today, it's the answers you'll get sound like an astrological forecast or something. And it's different for every person you ask. And it shouldn't be that way. There should be just like if a veteran has a problem, they go to the Veterans Administration. They know what to do. Well, if someone's homeless, what do you do? Nobody seems to know. And we need to stop the flow of homelessness to begin with. The housing insecurity is a real issue. There's so many people falling out of housing at a rate much faster than we are housing people in that pool, the huge pool of 60,000 plus who are homeless, where we have a lot of bridge homes to nowhere, and where people are languishing in interim housing. We've built so much interim housing and so much temporary things, but that's not the goal. We're trying to permanently fix people's lives. We need to take a holistic approach. We need to fix the whole person, their medical needs, their addiction needs, their housing needs. They may need mental health. In my case, I needed all of these things. And fortunately, I had a single person who took the time and guided me through all these and got me to the other side. Each time you pass the baton, it gets fumbled. And that's what happened in almost every case with me in the system. It always got fumbled. And I know I'm going on. I'll let you guys.
No, it's okay. But you gave a good opening for the first kind of zoom out that I do want to take, and I have a couple other street level questions, but you gave the perfect opening. And, of course, at the heart of this crisis, there's a severe lack of affordable housing, all kinds of affordable housing. And Jamar, I was wondering, since you're with an organization that works in affordable housing, operates it, can you talk about in LA, what what are the biggest barriers to creating new affordable housing? And if you just picked one or two big ones, are there any potential solutions there that you see?
Well, thank you. First of all, happy to be with you all. Sean, I wish I could yield all of my time back to you because you're nailing it. Your experience is important. I think one of the things that stood out is that, we talk about the face of homelessness and people experiencing homelessness. We shoot to people who are experiencing mental illness, people who are battling addiction, but we also know that the true face includes more. It includes folks who are just working full time but don't have enough money to afford housing. And so this is where enterprise comes in. Now, we are affordable housing nonprofit. We're focused on making sure that everyone in our community has an affordable place to live and that our communities are stepping stones to more. So when we think about ending homelessness, we need to think beyond getting people off the street right now, beyond interim solutions. We're asking questions of how do we ensure that there's enough housing, the right mix of services to keep people housed over the long term. And to Sean's point, also, what can we do to prevent vulnerable people from falling into homelessness in the first place? That is a priority that is important to us, and those two issues are things that if we don't solve, we won't be able to end homelessness in LA. As it relates to barriers to creating affordable housing, there are plenty. I mean, we have lack of funding, we have lack of, exorbitant costs to build housing. We're not looking at ways to look at some of the smaller landowners who have property, who have units available. Not enough vouchers available. So as I mentioned, people who aren't experiencing addiction or mental illness, but they work full time, but yet just can't afford a home. We're not doing anything to help mitigate that gap between what people earn and what they need to afford a home. And so we do advocate for not just one set of solutions, but a multitude. But there is no one solution. But high cost and barriers to that gap of what people need to stay in housing is something that we need to address.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how do you, when you talk about the high cost, what are ways that could come down? Of course, there's different kinds of affordable housing. There's permanent supportive housing, which can take a long time to build and is for the neediest people. Not everyone needs that. It seems like there's also a lot in between market rate and deeply subsidized housing that we need and ideally would have more of. And please, anyone feel free to jump in. But since we're talking about solutions here tonight,
I'd happily jump in. There's a lot of innovative ideas that are being put into practice right now, and they just need to be applied at scale. So we're short about 500,000 affordable units, and we need to just put up a whiteboard and figure out a plan to get there, which is going to lead to some of the governance conversations, which I think will come later. But the reality is, if, for example, the Hilda Solis Care First site, which was formerly called Bigness, which I had the honor to help work on with the supervisor, is at a cost of less than $200,000 per unit. The reason for the low cost was it was using CARES Act funding plus some local funding. So it had one funding source instead of the multiple layers of financing that are typically required, which require a much longer lead time. And it was also done under the CEQA exemption, which was passed through the state legislature.
I'm going to pause you. That's
sure.
It's a little in the weeds if people aren't familiar. You're talking about environmental requirements that can be very, very time consuming, very complicated, that it was exempt from. And I'm sorry, what is this project exactly for people who aren't familiar?
So it's 232 units in sort of the northern downtown LA area. And it was built by, at the direction of the Los Angeles County Department of Public Works through the direction of the supervisor there, Supervisor Hilda Solis. And it's being run by the Weingart Center. That's the service provider running the site. And it was built at less than $200,000 per unit in less than 6 months.
Got it.
We need a lot more housing like that. I think we've also got a lot of untapped potential in the city. While homeless, I stumbled into, you learn about abandoned buildings, you learn about buildings in receivership. And I saw somewhere, I don't know if the number's correct, but there's about that same number, 500,000 units in receivership in the city without tenants. I'm sure those landlords who own those buildings would love to have the city put someone in at any cost and to keep them afloat. I've seen a lot of talk about the tiny homes, and that's been very distressing because, with the city talking $130,000, $150,000 a unit, and I'm watching television and they're showing how they can make one that's fully tricked out for 30 grand. And I'm going, why is it costing us 5 times the money to build the same type of building? And so it is refreshing to hear that project came in at such a low cost. So that is good. I think a lot of the work that LASA does would be much better if LASA had some authority to do something. And no offense, but LASA was created to solve this problem. And then once they come up with solutions, they're not allowed to do anything. They can make recommendations and that's it. And that's got to be frustrating. And both for the unhoused and for those at LASA. What is the city and the county thinking? We've got the best minds. They've done some wonderful work. I've actually seen some of it in a program where I studied homelessness and careers for a cause. We actually went through a lot of the research papers that LASA has created, and some of them are wonderful, but they just go unread and they don't ever get enacted. Nothing gets done. So we need to find a way to get all of this wonderful thought and all this wonderful potential here into actual action.
Well, what about, you do keep giving me good openings for new lines of questioning. I do want to ask about governance and how it works in LA, because you talked about LASA not always having the authority to just go out and enact policies. LASA, correct me if I'm wrong, answers to like a couple dozen bosses. And it seems in LA right now that there's a lot of policymakers and different entities that have different views on what we should be doing about this homelessness crisis. Every city council office has its own ideas. Different law enforcement agencies sometimes have different ideas, county supervisors. There's a federal judge in the mix who has very particular ideas. So
there's no unified thought on it. There's no one's we've got too many hands in the pot, and everyone is trying to do things from very different angles with very different perspectives on it.
So how can we fix it? How can we fix it? Because I know we are trying to stay focused on the solutions, but what would help?
We need to stop wagging the dog by the tail. We've like I said, we have LASA. We have it. It needs to be given some power, empowered. We need to have some central agency or central control that can actually do something that is consistent across all congressional districts in this area. They shouldn't change. Just because I'm on one side of Worcester or the other side, there shouldn't be different benefits or different policies regarding homelessness. It's still the same tent.
I want to bring Carter in because I don't think we've heard from you at all yet, and I know the United Way does work on policy and talks to all these different players involved. Could you speak to that governance issue and what LA might do about it?
Yeah, thank you. I haven't said much because I feel like everybody's covering the territory well. I think for us, we run a sort of a collective impact model where the philosophy is we don't live in a jurisdiction where everybody's got where there's one entity that has singular power. We didn't get here from one cause, and we're not going to get out of it with just one solution. So I think for us, there are some good ideas on the table. I know Sarah is representing one of those proposals. For us, we want the best ideas to rise to the top and to resolve these questions, because I think the longer we hold open this governance question unresolved, we're cutting ourselves short in our ability to get that unified effort that Sean's talking about. We've got to get focused and organized on a shared goal and drive progress across all of our power structures toward the same common agenda. And I don't know that we're ever going to live in Los Angeles where one entity has the authority to end poverty and reverse the housing crisis. But I am eager to get to a point where we are no longer creating additional governance proposals, we are starting to reconcile them and have the best of those ideas sort of rise to the top and resolve them so we can move forward and keep going.
Mm-hmm. I'd like, oh, Sarah, were you about to
say? I would just chime in. I mean, so as part of my work on the Committee for Greater LA, we just recently issued a report. We hired Rafe Sonnenschein, who's an expert in governance, to analyze this system, and his conclusions were identical to Sean's, with the idea of how do we create that centering agency, a governing board who's able to set the big collective goal of what I believe is, functional zero for unhoused individuals. And that means, homelessness would become something rare and could be easily fixed. And that is only going to happen if we are able to drive collective action across agencies. Because as we touched on earlier, and Janie was mentioning in terms of the research that she's done, 25 to 30% of people who are unhoused need access to mental health care. And there isn't access to care. And there's, within a larger percentage, people need access to substance use treatment. There's not access. And I do believe that we have designed an incredibly expensive system with bad outcomes. So it is a resource issue in terms of where we're placing resources, but it's $600 to house my brother in jail for a night. It's $60 for him to be in a crisis bed. So we're spending a good amount of money. It's just we need to spend it in different ways. And we have been completely starved of resources for permanent housing. Those have been cut in the 75% range year over year, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican president. It's only recently that people are acknowledging this crisis of American homelessness and the need for substantial investments in both public housing and in vouchers or tenant-based or project-based vouchers. 75% of Americans who are low income and qualify for federal subsidies don't get them. And in Los Angeles, that means 1 in 8 who qualify for housing actually get it. And so this sort of starving of those resources means that we have the largest unsheltered population in the United States. And it's not until we have a bird's eye view, as well as, an entity that has that ability to look across cross-sectional, look over a DMH, look at the fact that the boarding care crisis is pushing thousands of people into homelessness, or either that or pushing thousands of people, displacing people into supportive housing units that could be utilized for others. So that is not transparent because we don't have that type of governance set up. And a lot of reports have been done in addition to the report I mentioned. There are about 4 reports that have just been released. And, we agree with what Carter just said, is now is the time for us to take action to really get going on some of these reforms so that we can move the ball forward.
Yeah, and I've seen the proposal from the Committee for Greater LA, and you were talking about having a new entity as they proposed that would try to sort of corral and streamline all these different fractured parts of the system that exist now. But I mean, if what they're suggesting happened, they wouldn't have budget power, they wouldn't have any real policy making power. So I'm just wondering, I mean, you guys are all deep in this. You're in the trenches. You have the ears in some cases of elected officials. Are there just, I don't want to oversimplify things, but are there just basic concrete things that the city and the county could do to work better together? That's been an issue for a long time. And just with what they have now, just get on the same page a little bit more than they are currently.
We've just gone through, I think, a credible example of stronger coordination between the city and the county and LAHSA by responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, only through us having a shared understanding of the danger that was posed to unhoused people in congregate settings were we able to stand up. I think it was 38 Project Roomkey sites at its peak. We're opening Project Homekey sites. The level of coordination and sort of unity of effort that we just witnessed and all felt and experienced during the pandemic, I think is the kind of focusing energy that we are missing. So I think it's possible. It's just that an emergency and a crisis like a pandemic reminds you that you can coordinate, you can bring it together and have a unified vision. We need to treat homelessness the same way. One of the challenges with doing that, though, as Sean led with, homelessness is a lot of things. And when you ask someone what they need and they tell you, it's going to be different for different people, and you need to believe them when they tell you. And you need to deliver, as Janie said, you need to deliver what it is that you promised. And I think one of the things that thwarts our ability to have that unified sort of crisis vision is that we also know that all of our societal failures, the failure of our health system, the failure of our housing system, the failure of our behavioral health system, or the failure of systemic racism that lingers in our society, it all comes and manifests in homelessness. And so I think we've got to have that kind of unified effort that we had during the pandemic, but we've got to focus that energy on getting people safely inside and getting them housed.
Yeah, it looks like just staying, on the LA picture for another minute, we're going to have a new mayor potentially sooner than we thought, maybe, but at least next year. Is there anything in particular? I know the mayor, of course, doesn't have unilateral control over this issue, but is an important figure in this. Are there things that you guys are looking for specifically from the next mayor of Los Angeles on homelessness?
Anna, can I just respond to your question about what the city and the county, and I think this is responsive to your question too about the mayor specifically, could do to better coordinate? Because I want to make a point that I think touches on something Sean shared earlier, which is that we have to change the way people interact with the system and simplify it by using the insights of the people who have actually experienced homelessness in Los Angeles. We require people to understand 4 or 5 massive safety net programs and all of their criteria and all of the ways of getting enrolled. And case managers are funded and designed to help navigate, but as Sean said, and has been my experience in interviewing providers as well, it's not consistently the case that someone is going to have one person assigned to them to help them understand that all. So I think a really simple thing to do is just try to step into the shoes of a person who would have to navigate all of this and make it easier for them to do that. There should be one phone number to call. You shouldn't have to take it upon yourself to understand the contact information for social services, homeless services, mental health care, physical health care, your local clinic. And while I don't think that's the intent, that is what's happening, and we should take a close look at that. There's a small slice of this. There is funding for homelessness prevention. So these are resources for people who believe they are about to become homeless, and there's usually a short window of time to reach them to avoid that outcome. And it's incredibly complex to access those services. You have to know who to call, that there's no hotline, there's no centralized hotline in Los Angeles like there is in some other cities. So, I'll give you one more example. To get into housing, you have to create a lot of documents. It's very time consuming. You have to document your income, your eligibility. Maybe there's specific things that you need to have or do for that unit because of how it's funded. There's a lot of documentation that's already held by county agencies, particularly by the Department of Social Services when someone's enrolled in a program like CalFresh. If the governments work together, you could transfer all of that information with client consent and auto-populate a lot of the documentation for housing. I'm just using that as one example of the kind of collaboration or coordination that I think would get prioritized if you prioritize the feedback of people with lived expertise in the system who are actually the victims of the lack of coordination. And I always like to emphasize that there's good intent because no one designs a system to be this complex. It just happens over time. And if you don't prioritize streamlining it it never happens.
I've been alerted, that we do have tons of audience questions. So
Okay.
I want to make sure we have time to get to those. And I really wanted to ask you guys one more really big picture question, which we probably could spend this whole hour talking about. But, we've been talking about this as a regional crisis, as a crisis in the county. A lot of the roots of LA's homelessness crisis do go up to the federal level and are even sort of baked into our culture. Are there just some very fundamental systemic ways that we think about housing and treat housing that we need to change in order to actually solve homelessness or get to functional zero?
Well,
We've got as Sarah was mentioning, how few people actually get access to the housing subsidies that they are eligible for. And I think one of the things we've got to acknowledge at the federal level is that housing is a human right. Healthcare is a human right, and we've got to start putting our money where our rights are, and delivering those rights at scale is something that I think the whole country would benefit from. And too many people who've been waiting too long, deserve nothing less than that.
yes, absolutely. We're talking about people here. It's a human problem. This should be an emergency. This should be like a national emergency. This is a county and city emergency that we're having here. It should be treated just like a FEMA event that we're having going on here. Look at the numbers. Look, they're astounding, and we don't even think we've got half of it counted. It's an access issue. Some of the points that Carter mentioned and Sarah mentioned, and Janie, as far as access to, say, medical care or to mental health issues, and respectively trauma-informed care and harm reduction. But the example of what we managed to do with COVID, that was probably the closest and the only time many of those people had any form of medical access, period. In my time on the street, the only times I was able to access the medical system was when there's a catastrophe. When I'm standing there with a screwdriver in the back of my neck, when I've got pneumonia and end up with a seven-day hospital stay. Access. People don't have access to the most basic of needs. The rest of us probably get checkups, once or twice a year. We could curtail a lot of the issues and problems that we have with people if people were ever able to have preventative care like regular human beings.
And I'm going to go to some of the questions that are coming in because I'm seeing a lot of them in the chat right now, and I want to make sure we get to as many as possible. There's a couple of different questions about the city adopting a right to housing principle or overall policy. I believe there's actually a proposal along those lines that's pending in City Council from Mark Ridley Thomas as well, that's still taking shape and being fleshed out. But a couple questions about that. What is stopping LA, in your view, from adopting a right to housing policy now? And do you guys think that would be helpful?
I mean, I can jump in. Part of the issue is has been the lack of investment from the federal government. And so I think there may be some hesitation in thinking, well, if Los Angeles adopts a right to housing, what's going to happen in Pasadena? Will residents just then go over to Los Angeles? How will that work with neighboring jurisdictions? How does that work across the state? And so I think those are some of the things that are being discussed. But I absolutely believe in a right to housing. And I think the concept of housing as infrastructure has been part of what has been holding us back. And when you're asking, what does the next mayor need to look at? I mean, I just think there needs to be a real understanding of how we got here in order to get out of this. And the real understanding is that we've had tons of federal subsidies for all sorts of things, for mortgages and for homeowners and other things that this federal government has subsidized, but we have completely starved our public housing And that has had a real impact. We've starved our access to mental health care and our access to basic health care. So I definitely believe in a right to housing. I think some of the challenge is thinking about, is that across the state? Is that across the region? And how would we go about actually making that a reality?
Are there any other cities that have successfully made a big dent in this issue that we could look at as an example?
Jamar or Carter, I can give a few, but.
The issue of rights to housing?
I was just jumping to another question. Are there any other cities that LA could look to as examples? Cities that have made significant progress on homelessness. Maybe they're not in the United States.
No, you know what I find in that, you know what I find in LA actually is I find that in LA we are probably doing some of the most innovative stuff in the country. We're just not doing it at scale. So there all the time I'm asked for examples of other cities that have figured it out, and you'll find an example from another city, and then you'll also find an example in LA of that same thing happening, but we're doing it as a pilot project in one council district or one supervisory district somewhere. And so I think the issue here is that we know what we need to do. We probably have the best examples of great practices here in this jurisdiction. We've got an issue of scale, and we've got an issue of resource scarcity. And our bold ideas are not always matched with bold money and bold scale that sort of matches those ideas. That's my 2 cents on that.
I would say I strongly believe what Carter and what Sarah just said. We have the tools. We've done many of these pilots and so forth, but we don't make them to scale because we haven't made it a priority. And that's all there is to it. It's not a priority. We need to make this a priority. Worrying about whether or not people from Orange County or from Pasadena or someone else will come over and take advantage of a system here that we have. Well, they should. I would. Who wouldn't? And isn't it? And people are people. We move around. Doesn't matter where they are. And if they come here, if we figure out a way to solve it, it doesn't matter where the people come from. They're still human beings and they still need help. Until we change that mindset, we're going to have a problem. Because we're going to be worried about, oh, we have something that works and someone, oh my God, they're from Santa Monica and they might come over here to LA and use our resources, and I think, they should. If we've got a better system, they'd be stupid not to.
Yeah, that actually goes to another question here from somebody watching. They asked, could you talk about, I guess several people have asked versions of this, could you talk about the disconnect between the emergency reaction that we've seen to the pandemic when homelessness is a bigger health crisis?
Yes, much bigger.
So I spent a lot of time in emergency management in a previous lifetime, and so it's been interesting to sort of watch in my today life working on homelessness, sort of seeing the struggles that we have, having that what we would call like incident command type response to homelessness, and comparing that with what happens when there's a tornado or a hurricane or a pandemic. I think that one of the differences that I'm observing is that, homelessness is really, it's hard. People are struggling with really challenging issues, and they're struggling with them everywhere. And they're struggling with them out on the street, and people everywhere don't have the tools, as Janie said. It's really hard to know what to do. I have people all the time who are like, I don't know who to call. And so I think that there is a shared emergency that we also share a confusion about what to do, because it's not clear how to go help the person that's in front of me. They can sit on webinars like this and hear like how we need a right to housing and how we need more housing and we need more vouchers. But I think that when they don't know how to help the person sitting outside their house or near, when they're walking down their street, it leads to a lot of confusion about how am I involved in the whole of community response to this. And I think our answer so far has been say yes to housing, say yes to shelter, but we're also going to have to make the system easier for them to understand how it works and how to activate it on behalf of people that they care about. in order to fully get across the finish line on that unified picture.
And on that note, I think a big part of the problem is people worry too much about how someone became homeless. And each and every story is unique. And with a catastrophe like Katrina, a storm came and it hit, and you can understand and comprehend that. You can't comprehend the dynamics of a family was broken from divorce, and a mother lost her job, and they were struggling, and the kids they can't afford daycare in school. That's hard to comprehend. But we need to stop worrying about it. It doesn't matter how they became homeless; they are, and we need to do something at that point, and stop trying to figure out, the if, when, and why, and all this stuff. That's not the problem. The problem is that these people need somewhere to live that's safe, secure, and that can become home for them.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. It does circle back with your other question, Anna, about cities who are doing this well. They're usually outside the United States. It's Singapore, it's Trieste, Italy, it's Finland. I mean, there are many places doing this well, but they do exactly what Sean just said. They treat housing as infrastructure, and they're just like, we have to make sure our people have housing, period. Mm-hmm. It's a completely matter of fact approach.
Yeah. Anna,
I want to piggyback off that, but yeah, go ahead.
I'd say on another point, something that we can do, the people on this committee or on this call, we can look at developing best practices for how to care for the homeless. It's done in such a hodgepodge, manner that each and every agency does something a little differently. Each county does something a little differently. Each city does something a little differently. There need to be some best practices on just how we do things. For example, just something as simple as a shelter. A shelter is that which provides protection from the elements and from danger. Well, it needs to be more than that, and we need to have some best practices telling us what that is.
I have a question here specifically for Carter. You mentioned some forward-thinking pilot programs that are happening but just need to be scaled up. Can you go into more detail about some examples of that?
Yeah, unarmed responses to people in crisis is an example of where we were looking around for what jurisdictions have already figured out how to have unarmed responses to people in crisis. And what we learned is that there's already several pilot projects happening in LA right now where people are thinking about not sending out an armed police officer, but sending out, trained, social workers with de-escalation skills and with the ability to understand and triage what's going on and to connect people to services. So there's pilots like that where once you go digging in another jurisdiction, you'll realize that's probably being tried here. But what we're not doing is putting the resources behind it to scale it up to the level of crisis that we know people are experiencing.
There's also a question here that Jamar, I think you might be able to speak to. There's a suggestion what about a local joint powers authority that could act as a developer, joint power, and owner of housing on state, county, and city-owned land. As someone in the affordable housing sphere, just would love to hear you weigh in on that suggestion.
Well, I do believe that it's not. It's common knowledge that there's a lot of public, property that's available, that's underutilized, and that could be an opportunity to, respond to what the private sector is not providing. Look at public property as far as what joint authorities would come under to make it happen. Lots of permutations there. As an affordable housing developer entity, we provide a lot of TA and support to organizations and bring government jurisdictions together to actually problem solve and figure these things out. I would venture that we would be happy to engage around, modeling what that could really look like. Because in Los Angeles City, in the city alone, there's so much public land that is underutilized, and a lot of people are drawing more attention to it. A lot of people are talking about, diverse models for housing, such as through land trust. Community land trust, or even public land trust, which probably is more applicable for this property. And so that should be on the table. There's no one solution, but that should be one solution that is actually explored.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here that goes to, it seems, where we began talking about street outreach. Sean, maybe you could speak to this. What should the approach be if somebody refuses care or services?
Service resistance or housing resistance, you have to realize that when you're doing it, when someone's doing outreach, you're walking into someone's life at a random time period and you don't know what's going on. It may have nothing to do with the situation or what you're offering. They may have just gotten robbed. They may not have eaten for a while. Maybe they slept, without any cover on, the night before. You really don't know what issues they're going through. And unless someone takes a trauma-informed approach, you're not going to make headway. And sometimes it's just a matter of coming back at another time when it's better. If I were just to knock on your door at a random time and said, "Hey, I'm here. Are you willing to move? I'll give you 5 minutes to grab some things. I'm not telling you where you're going. I can't describe what it looks like, and you have to decide right now. Are you going to go? Probably not." So we have to keep all those things in mind. It takes a few times coming to talk to someone. You got to build trust. You have to build a relationship. Before I got off the street, when Kim would come by and each time it was the same thing. We had to trust her, and that we were being led the right way. It's not something it doesn't matter what's being offered. I have to be ready to receive it. And that's just human nature.
Yeah. Janie, maybe you could field this one. A lot of people are asking about how non-governmental entities like universities or corporations or film production companies, tech companies, et cetera, how could those entities be involved in helping to solve the crisis?
That's a great question. Those are a lot of different kinds of organizations. Let me just say one thing that's been on my mind that's responsive to that. So Sarah has talked about starving the funding for housing. And I just want to be really clear about the main cause of homelessness in our region. 50 years ago, the state of California decided to not build housing to keep pace with population growth. And that decision has played out in zoning laws, land use regulations, environmental regulations, building codes, fees, permits, these layers and layers and layers of local and state red tape that make it very expensive, if not impossible, to build dense housing and affordable housing. We have a massive shortage of housing. It makes the cost of housing go up, and at the same time, average income has stagnated. So the average income that people are earning is not really increasing, and your housing costs are increasing. And when you get to spending more than 30% of a person's income on housing, you can expect to see homelessness in your community. And in Los Angeles, we're over 50%. So my answer to what can corporations do, they carry a lot of weight. The tech industry has a lot of weight with elected officials, with state, local, the county. And one thing I firmly believe is that if people understood these state policies and when people are attempting to reform them, if they connected those decisions to our homelessness problem, we would have a lot more consensus around changing these things. What happens is that they come piecemeal and you get confused. Why wouldn't I vote for an environmental regulation? Why wouldn't I want to ensure appropriate amounts of parking? The answer is you should be asking whether those things are contributing to our homelessness problem, if that's what you care about. And I think if big influential stakeholders like corporations, universities, and others understood that there are policy solutions that have to flow, particularly from the state down, we could maybe make progress, at least on educating people about the link between these things and our homelessness problem. And of course, we've seen major tech companies in California donate land that they have, commercial property that they own, but it's very complicated for them too to build housing for all the reasons that I've said. Not to say that that's not a good idea. Of course, any solution is welcome. And then, of course, I deeply believe that our universities have a lot of intellectual firepower to add data analysis and research. So documenting best practices, evaluating bridge programs work, holding ourselves to a higher standard, leveraging data to make decisions. Those are all things that I think our university partners are trying to do, have been doing, and could do more of.
Jamar, this is a question for you. How are organizations like yours successful in actually building housing? Can you talk a little about what it takes?
The type of housing that we primarily support is multifamily affordable housing for low-income families, low-income seniors, and homeless veterans, and different populations. And so we provide capital and technical assistance. And so a lot of our community development partners are the ones who are the actual developers. We help bring debt and equity to support those projects. They're often larger. We're talking about 25 to 300 unit type properties. We have been doing this for decades, and one thing that we'll continue to do that. It's really important to us, but we're also putting a lot of attention towards preservation. There are just as many units that we're helping to bring online that are losing their affordability, and so our charge is also to not just focus on production, but to also focus on preservation. But we have found success with assisting the local developers to access property by providing them pre-development loan, the hardest dollars to reach developers, that higher risk money to do speculative work, pre-development work. We also help them secure other sources of financing. So that's been our history. That's what we'll continue to be good at. We are faced with our partners are faced with the same challenges that all developers are faced with. The cost of land, cost to acquire land is the cost to acquire land, whether you're a nonprofit or a mission-driven developer or a for-profit. And so we're subject to the same level of challenges in the permitting process, from the capital stack that is so daunting, where you may need half a dozen to 10 different capital sources to bring a project to bear, all different deadlines, and not a lot of coordination there. And so the development process is pretty similar to that of the coordinated entry system model, where a lot of just disjointed, well-meaning but disjointed activities. And we're trying to help improve those at the housing development level and also at the CES level.
Well, I see a question here that I think is a good final question that I'll just open up for all of you to weigh in on. I think it's fair to say there's agreement that there are many things LA could do better to alleviate this crisis, but is homelessness something that LA can manage or even end on its own, or does it need to be addressed on a federal level?
I mean, I'll go first. I don't think any community is gonna get to functional zero, as Sarah mentioned, without strong partnerships at the local, state, and federal level. It's foundational, I think, to that end state, but I'm optimistic that we have a better administration now that sees housing as infrastructure, as Sarah said. So I do think it's possible to have that partnership. I think the caution that I have is this juxtaposition of like pursuing bold goals with big resources and plans, but also being credible, because I think that people are exhausted with plans to end homelessness that don't result in a tangible impact. And so I think we've got to do both. We've got to say, let's do big things and let's go big at hard problems. But I think we have to also be credible about what we're promising and the timeframes that we're promising it, based on the resources that we actually have and don't have. So I think that's a tension that I think we struggle with in homeless services.
I think we're in an extremely unique moment where we already have the federal government's interest. So, and back to my point about, the next mayor needs to understand what brought us here. Look, the federal government, we made some huge mistakes in the Great Depression. We made some huge mistakes in the Great Recession, where the drive for recovery was inequitable and created some of the mistakes that are ending up in homelessness now. So the reason, I'm for looking at governance reform and trying to get that bird's eye view is to make sure that we're maximizing what we're getting from the federal government. I found out today about resources both for behavioral health and in-home care that have now been extended to people experiencing homelessness. I want to make sure we're getting a piece of that. So I don't think it can be accomplished without the federal government, but they've pretty much already said they're there because this is integral to COVID recovery, period. And as we've talked about today, we've seen what we can do. We in our response to COVID-19, within a matter of months, we housed thousands and thousands of people, around 8,000 people, which was 20% of our unsheltered population. Well, we just got to keep going. We've got to figure out collective action across sectors. We've got to figure out how we're cutting that red tape, making it way more easy to build housing through these innovative models at scale. We've got to eliminate, the paperwork that Janie was describing, and we've made some progress. We have a universal housing application that just launched, in part because of things that Sean went through that I then brought back, to the group and said this can't happen again. So we are learning, but it's only going to work with, as we've said, I think all of us here today, with this bold, putting bold at scale collective action on the table, treating it like an emergency, remembering every minute that we're talking about human beings and their lives and families and and their families. It just kills me every day, and I really do think we can do this, but it's going to take a completely different approach.
Well, we are at time. I don't want to keep everyone late. I know we could probably talk about this for many more hours. I want to just thank all of you guys for participating tonight. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in. Thank you to Zócalo Public Square, to the United Way, and the Committee for Greater Los Angeles for presenting this conversation. This video will stay public online, and you'll be able to find a summary of the discussion, plus interviews with myself and all of the panelists who are here on Zócalo's website, zocalopublicsquare.org. If you liked this event, please do tune into Zócalo's next event, which is this Thursday, June 17th at 6:30. It's called What Makes a Good Small Town? If you are on the go, you can listen to that on Zócalo's podcast and subscribe to the newsletter for updates. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate everybody's time, and have a wonderful evening. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in other venues.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you.